So, Julio, I've been long wanting to do a kind of a master class on fit interviews. So, what can a candidate expect in a fit interview? And the reason I want to do this is because it's kind of the other half of the interview, right? So, everyone knows it's there, everyone hears that it's very important, but also everyone neglects it, which is kind of interesting. And even we kind of neglect it, right? Like 98% of our content is on case interviews because it's much harder to learn. So there's this thing with fit interviews that it's there, it's important, you're going to get it, you know you're going to get it, but people neglect it in a way. Few people know when they've prepared enough. So the people who do prepare for it, they don't know if they're good or not. Like there's no material or good videos so that you can benchmark your performance. It's kind of mystical what they're looking for, right? There's all these phrases going around, cultural fit. And, they just want to see if they like you or the airport test and stuff like that. And today I want to do that. I want to do this masterclass in kind of a podcast format. So we can talk about it and discuss some things, but I have a structured outline here so that we cover the major topics of what to expect. I'm not going to talk about advanced preparation strategies or anything. We can leave that to another episode. But just give a good baseline for people to understand why they're doing it, what kinds of fit questions there are in their fit interviews, the PEI, McKinsey's PEI, which is a very specific type of behavioral interview. And I'll try to avoid the obvious advice like, just be yourself and be confident, shake their hands in a firm way or whatever. Like, I'm going to try to be pragmatic as we are on the advice and give very specific things that they're looking for and hopefully that you can't find elsewhere on the internet.
All right, makes sense. So what specifically are they going to learn about fit interviews?
So they're going to learn specifically why they do it, the two different types of fit interviews that there are, which are completely different beasts. And a lot of people don't know how different they are in terms of preparation, in terms of how you should deliver your answer and prepare your answer and stuff like that. We're going to talk about each of those types. So there's the general fit, which is what most firms do. And there's the PEI, which McKinsey always does. And it's basically the only fit interview that they care about. But also some other firms are starting to do it. BCG, some interviewers do let's say a light version of the PEI. So we're going to go in depth into the PEI, talk about how it works, the types of questions, what are they looking for in your answer. And then at the end, we're going to try to evaluate, like, in truth, how important is the fit? Is it actually 50% of your interview in terms of your evaluation and your chances of moving ahead and getting the offer? Or is it less important, like most people treat it? Like most people say it's like very important, but then in practice, they don't really spend much time or money or attention on it. So is it really important if you're not giving a shit about it?
All right. Sounds good. So tell me, why do consulting firms do the fit portion of the interview?
All right. Before I do that, I just want to refer our listeners and viewers to an article that I wrote, which I think is a good resource for them to use after watching this, which is it's Consulting Interview Questions, the Complete Guide, I think, or the Complete List.
The Complete List.
Okay. So crafting cases, consulting interview questions on Google. There are 26 questions. Most of them are fit questions. And there's like a short description of why they do the question, how frequent it is, how difficult it is in terms of how do most people do in it, what are they looking for, how to structure answer, and additional resources.
And examples of answers, which is something I love from that article.
There's examples of answers as well. Yeah. So I think it's a good article to refer. There are the case types questions as well, but most of them are fit because there's 6 types of case questions, as we show in the free course, which I managed to plug into this episode, even though it's a fit episode and the free course is about cases. But so if you're interested in what are the 6 types of case questions and how to answer them with a proper step-by-step technique and also get practice drills, you can go to craftingcases.com/course.
Your advertiser, me, thanks you for this placement.
All right. So why do consulting firms do fit interviews? It's quite an interesting question, isn't it? Because a lot of people say all they care about is the case. But that's obviously not true because they're allocating time into the interview and also in the evaluation sheet for the fit. It's usually less time than the case. It's usually like 20 minutes and the case is like 40, or 25 minutes and the case is 35. But sometimes it's still a lot of time, and also some partners do the whole interview as a fit interview. And they're basically trying to assess 3 things with the fit interview. Any fit interview question is assessing these 3 things in different weights, but it's these 3 things. The first one is they want to know they want to understand and see your enthusiasm in joining consulting or joining their firm. Right? So, and why do they do that? Why do they want enthusiastic consultants? So it's, a very enthusiastic place to work at? Not really. I mean, that also, but that's not the main point. The main point is consulting is extremely taxing. Right? Sometimes you have to work 60-hour weeks. Well, that's almost every week, but 70-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks. Sometimes you have to stay away from friends, family, because you're in another location, and you have to really dedicate yourself to work. It's a really energy draining work, in the sense that you're using your intellect all the time, your empathy, you're talking to people, you're doing models, you have way more stuff than you can handle all the time. So if you don't really want it, you're not gonna do well at it. I compare it to like being an athlete. Like, you're not gonna be a part-time athlete. Like, you need to really give yourself to the task, right? You need to really want it. So that's one thing that they're looking for, enthusiasm. Now, the other thing that it comes together with enthusiasm is they want to see whether or not you really understand what the job entails.
Right.
Because it's easy to be enthusiastic about a dream, like a fantasy, but it's another thing to really understand the job and still be enthusiastic about it. And that's what really matters, right? So my parents are doctors. A lot of people want to be physicians. They want to go to medical school in their high school or whatever. But once they see what actually being a doctor looks like, then a lot of people change their minds, because it's taxing, right? It's a beautiful profession, but it's also very taxing on you in your personal life as an individual. So that's kind of the same with consulting. I'm not trying to compare consultants to MDs or anything, but in the sense of how much you have to donate yourself to the profession, it's kind of similar. Yeah,
I think that in a sense, the enthusiasm and understanding the job together show the interviewer whether, like, they predict your longevity in the firm. If you really understand the job and you're enthusiastic about it, then you're more likely to stay for a longer time in the job than someone who's gonna, they want it, but they think it's Disney World, so they'll get there and they're gonna get negatively surprised and leave right away.
Yeah, it also predicts your attitude when ish hits the fan, right?
Yeah.
So, like, how enthusiastic are you at 3 a.m.
on a Friday?
Friday, it might happen, and they want to see that you're enthusiastic for the right reasons, right? And also, like, if you don't understand the job, then you probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And the third reason they do fit interviews, which I guess is the most important reason, even though the other two are important enough, is to assess your consulting soft skills, right? So the case is very good at assessing your hard skills, your problem-solving skills. Can you do math? Can you structure a problem? Can you generate solutions for a specific situation? But there are tons of soft skills that you need as a consultant, and that as you progress your career, they become more and more important, even compared to the problem-solving skills, right? So to be a good analyst, perhaps the hard skills are more important, even though the soft skills are up there. But to be a partner or a manager, the soft skills are even more important, right? So what are these soft skills? Some examples: structured, clear communication. It's one thing to be a great problem solver. It's another thing to be a great problem solver who can communicate, talk, or write in a structured and clear way. So to give a perhaps stereotypical example, it's the coder, the programmer, computer software engineer. Like, a lot of them are great problem solvers, at least in the software engineering context, but many of them, obviously not all of them, but many of them are not very articulate. And they don't need to be. Like, they need to talk to computers, not to boardrooms or anything, right? And I'm obviously being simplistic here, but just because we're on the internet and you have to make this caveat. So this is one soft skill, which has some elements of hard skills, but it's mainly a soft skill. Another one is persuasion skills. Can you persuade your colleagues, your clients, to change their minds, to do something that maybe they're not incentivized to do, to agree with one another, right? So when you're doing the cases, you think it's all logical problem solving, but in reality, consulting is a people's business, and you need to not only present the theoretical solution that may be very pragmatic and etc., but it's still on paper. You have to convince real people to change the way they do their job, and the way they interact with other people within their organization to do things different. And a lot of people don't want to change things because they've been doing it for ages, and we're all the same, right? We don't want to change things. Consultants also don't want to change. It's human. And you need persuasion skills to do that. Another one, leadership skills. Can you convince and work with other people to help them achieve something or to work towards a common goal? And this is very important, again, and hard to assess in a case. Getting things done. Like, can you start a project, do the project, deliver the project on time, on specification, etc. Maybe you can do a case, but will you do it if it takes a month to do it? A lot of people don't. Being client-friendly, or the more formal term, I guess, executive presence. Can you be around senior people in businesses or organizations or the public sector and be respectable? And also be friendly in a way that they like you, right? This is important in consulting. So they're testing for these soft skills, right? So that's probably the main reason why they do fit. And they are also looking at that during the case. For example, you can solve the case with more or less executive presence or with better communication, but the fit has a role here. And then obviously your enthusiasm and your understanding of the profession, because it's a profession that not a lot of people understand.
Okay.
So I'd say this are the main reasons why they do it. And there's a couple reasons that people think it's why they do it, but it's not. At least they behave as if they thought. So one is the fit is not a laundry list of your professional or career or education achievements.
Yeah.
Like, you're not there to read your CV. They can read your CV just fine. They're looking for more depth than you can find on the CV.
Yeah.
And also, it's not, does the interviewer personally like me and would have a beer with me, right?
Yeah. I think that there's a bit of confusion there, because people talk a lot about the airport test, right? And in a sense, it's a feeling that the interviewer is going to have of you. So how does that fit in there?
It's a good question. So one thing, so back when I was at McKinsey, there were people that I was really close with. Like, I'd call them friends, and I call few people actual friends, and I'd call them friends. And there were a lot of people who I wouldn't call friends. I wouldn't spend a Saturday with them, like personally, unless it was work. But I wouldn't choose to spend a Saturday with them instead of my friends or family. And I probably wouldn't invite them over for a coffee or a beer, just because we had different, I wouldn't say values, but we had different interests.
Yeah.
You know, we had different maybe personalities, and it's fine. It was a professional relationship. Now, what these people weren't is they weren't jerks.
Yeah.
They weren't unpleasant to be with. They weren't, well, some of them were a bit awkward, but they weren't overly awkward in the sense that it was uncomfortable to be with them, or that they would make, comments that were just, the feeling.
Yeah, not inappropriate, but just doesn't work in a social setting.
Yeah, so they were perfectly fine people that weren't my friends. And I guess most of my interviewers, I didn't connect on a friend level with them.
Yeah.
They probably wouldn't have a beer with me. Like, they were 35. I was maybe 23 or 24 at the time.
Yeah.
And like, they had a family. They didn't care too much about me. But so would I pass the airport test with them? And would all these people that I'm talking about pass the airport test? Yes, I'd be fine to be with them in an airport. Going back home or going to the client, the flight is delayed. For those who don't know, the airport test is, would I be okay if I spent 6 hours in an airport with them if the flight was delayed? So basically, it means like I would pass the airport test, but I wasn't trying to connect with my interviewers on a deep, friendly level. Like, if this happens in your interview, great. It's not really going to help you if you do poorly on the case, or even if you don't have fit with the firm. Because interviewers, when they're interviewing, they're being professional. They have specific standards that they want to tick the box, let's call it that way. So that's did I make sense? This is the difference.
It doesn't matter that whether your interviewers are not looking for a friend, but they do want to know that you're someone who they would be fine spending a few hours with if work required.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Got the point.
So that's why they do the fit. Now, as I said in the beginning of the episode, there's two types of fit, and they're completely different beasts. So one type of fit question or one type of fit interview is the general fit. It's a general name that I've called the general fit. It's what you have usually in behavioral interviews at other firms.
Yeah.
And its role is mostly to understand your enthusiasm to join consulting and your understanding of the profession. And so the interviewer can see if you can at least connect your background with consulting.
Okay.
So a lot of people think, they're trying to see if my background is good for consulting. No, they already saw that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting at the interview.
Yeah.
They're trying to see if you can connect your background with consulting. If you see yourself as relevant for consulting, because that's important if you want to join consulting, right?
Yeah.
And that's the general fit. So it's like questions like, hey, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to join consulting? Why have you chosen BCG to interview with? Or like, tell me about this experience from your CV. How was the basketball club?
Yeah.
Or whatever. Right?
Yeah. I got one that's pretty interesting, which was, what are you doing here? They can find more about that question in the case interview questions, the consulting interview questions, complete list article that you mentioned.
Yeah. So this is the general fit. And can they look at some soft skills here? Yes, but it's not the main point, right? They can see your communication, if it's structured, if it's clear. They can see maybe your persuasion, leadership skills, but very on a surface level, depending on the experiences that you bring.
Yeah.
And I guess they could see your executive presence, your client friendliness, because you're talking to them and it's kind of the same as talking to a client, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the other type of fit interview, which is the PEI, the personal experience interview.
Yeah.
And this is a completely different beast. They ask you to tell and it's very common at McKinsey. In fact, it's mandatory at McKinsey. At every McKinsey interview, you will have one personal experience interview. And they will ask you a specific story of a past experience that showcases a specific skill. For example, tell me about a time where you had to lead a group to achieve a difficult objective. And they're expecting a complete story about that. Not just a 2-minute story without much details. We're going to go deeper into the PEI later on this episode, but it's a very different type of interview because it takes like 15 minutes, this one story.
Yeah.
And we'll delve deeper into the details. So there's these two types of fit interviews. And they're very different because the PEI is only focused on soft skills, consulting soft skills, especially interpersonal skills.
And what I'm getting is that the PEI has a more direct relationship between, what they're asking you and what they're testing. They're asking for a story on a specific skill and they're directly testing that skill. And in general fit, they're asking you general broad questions about your career, your choices, your perspective, and they're testing something that's not being asked directly. So your enthusiasm, your thought process, your understanding of the job, but they're not going and asking, tell me how enthusiastic you are about consulting or tell me what you understand about the job. Although they might, but that's not common.
Yes, I'd say that. I'd say that the general fit is more like a sniff test. It's like, they're not looking for anything specific. It's more like, does this person make sense here?
Yeah.
Right? While in the PEI, for each type of question, so we're going to go into the types of questions later, but there are leadership questions, persuasion questions, etc. For each type of question, they're looking for very specific things, very specific skills, very specific abilities that you've shown in the past in a real situation, and they'll ask you deeply about that so that they understand if you actually have that soft skill. While in a general fit, let's say you tell about a story in your resume in the general fit, like, oh, tell me about this thing in your resume. It's not a PEI yet. It's just a random general fit question. If they ask about that and maybe you tell a 2-minute story about that, they might see like, oh, this person seems to have good leadership skills. Yeah. But they don't know it. Right? They're not probing deep. They're not asking for the rationale of why you did something this way and not that way. Yeah. They're not acid testing your answer. They're just taking your answer as it is. Maybe they'll ask a question or two about it out of curiosity, but they're not specifically looking for that. Okay. Right? So it's more like a sniff test. Like, I'll talk for 10, 15 minutes with this person and see if they kind of make sense here.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay, got it. Now let's stop working around it and tell me, what can they expect? What interviewers are looking for? What are the candidates going to find in the general fit interview?
Okay, sounds good. So, as I said, mostly enthusiasm, understanding the job. I'll delve deep into each of the main questions. Also some soft skills. So, one question in the fit interview that is probably the hardest one to answer, actually, is tell me about yourself. Right? So, tell me about yourself. What are they looking for here? First thing, structured storytelling.
Yeah.
So if you start like, oh, I was born in 1990, whatever, in Kansas, and and you talk about your childhood, this is no offense, it's not a therapy session. Like, they don't care. So they're looking for, can you tell a objective, structured story about why you make sense here? It's kind of like the question you got, like, why are you here?
Yeah.
So tell me about yourself is, why are you here? Like, what brought you to this interview? What brought you to, spend time preparing perhaps for consulting interviews, and why are you here? Like,
and I guess that on some level they can also get a feeling of how you think, because they can see whether, you have a cohesive stories. You understand why you did each thing and how that leads you to where you are at that moment.
Exactly.
Rather than, a story where random things happen and then randomly you're there.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to mess up this question. One is to not have empathy for your interviewer and see like, oh, he doesn't care about my aunt doing cakes in the summer or whatever. Like, they care about, like, when they say tell me about yourself, what they mean is tell me about your career trajectory and why you're here. Like, how did you get here and where do you want to go in a professional way, right?
Yeah.
So this is one way, and I call this lack of empathy, because when you, like, fast forward 5 years, you're in consulting, you ask this question to someone, you also don't care too much about, like, about their personal origins or whatever. And the other way to mess up this question is to have no structure at all, so that you just keep talking and keep talking and keep talking. Like, even if you just talk about your career, and I'm not saying you only have to talk about your career, you can share an interest or two, like a hobby or whatever. But let's stick to the career example. You can have a very career-oriented answer of things that will be interesting to your interviewer to know you as a professional, but you can spend 35 minutes on it.
Yeah.
Describing every action you took at every project you did in your career, and, the minutiae of how you took each decision. And that's also a poor way to answer it. Because it's not structured, and your interviewer can ask follow-up questions whenever they want.
Yeah, right? And also it's not prioritized at all.
Exactly. Yeah, so suppose like a client asks, who are you? Like, tell me about yourself. And then you spend the next 30 minutes in a monologue. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Unless you're a podcaster, of course. Then you can monologue as much as you want. So the second question in the general fit is, why consulting? So why do you want to go into consulting? Very common question, especially, at any firm, pretty much. McKinsey tends to focus on the PEI. So a lot of McKinsey interviewers won't do any general fit questions, although you can get them. They don't really matter at McKinsey. But why consulting, you get everywhere, and at Bain specifically, you'll probably get it every interview.
Yeah.
What they expect is a concise, structured answer that shows you understand what consulting is. Yeah. And that you have believable reasons to want to join consulting, which they can translate into enthusiasm. Yeah. And they also expect to hear it in a tone that's enthusiastic, right? Because if you're like, oh, I actually want to join consulting because it's a very interesting career, you know. And you're like, you sound like you're dying. Then it's kind of hard to believe, right?
Yeah, I want to get out of here.
Yeah. So good answers to this is like, oh, there's actually 3 reasons I want to join consulting. The first one is this, the second one is this, and the third one is this.
Yeah.
So it's structured, it's concise. In each one of those, you can show, one, that you understand what consulting is. So you're not like, oh, it's a good salary and I get to fly in first class, you know, business class or whatever.
Yeah.
You're actually like giving good reasons about the job. And ideally, these reasons connect with your background or your intentions forward, right? Because then it's realistic. Oh, okay, so like these are good reasons and they make sense to this guy in front of me.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, I want to join consulting because the learning curve is amazing. And then there's nothing in your history that shows you actually like to learn different things. Like you've been a specialist your whole life and perhaps not a very good one. So it's kind of weird, right? Then there's the variation of this question, which is why this firm? So like, why McKinsey? Why BCG? Why Bain?
Yeah.
And it's a similar structure. Like concise, structured, show that you understand the firm versus other firms.
Yeah.
And also that connects to you, right? So same structure. And there's actually an article that I wrote, which is Why Consulting, the Anatomy of a Perfect Interview Answer or something like that. You can look up on Google. It's a very extensive article that goes into like numerous examples and criteria and ideas for you to structure the answer for why consulting, as well as why this firm. Similar questions. Now,
great.
The mistake people do on the why this firm is they give reasons that would apply
to any consulting firm.
To any consulting firm or to their direct competitors. And I've even seen interviewers like twist this question with like, oh, why BCG? Why not McKinsey? And then it puts you in a corner because you're like, oh shit, my reasons are all like applied to both. And to be honest, almost all reasons apply to all consulting firms. At least the ones in the same tier, let's call it that way.
Yeah.
Because they're very similar.
Yeah.
It's like Ivy League schools. Like there are differences, yes, but they're more similar than they're different, right? And the way out of that is to either look on their website or ideally talk to consultants at that firm and ask them specific stories, specific examples of their values on how they're different from other firms. And they'll give you stories and arguments that are believable to your interviewer. Even though they might be actually similar, like they might be different also. So, but at least they're believable and they show you did the work.
Yeah.
Right. And then the fourth type of general fit question is CV-based questions. So the interviewer will presumably have your CV. They may ask you like, oh, tell me about this experience, like this project you did at your last employer. How was it?
Yeah.
And here they want to see basically a good story, structured, clear, show some quality of you, like some strength that you have. And hopefully this strength is useful in consulting as well. Like you could be a good artist, but that doesn't really matter, right? It's better to show that you're productive, that you work well with other people, that you have good problem-solving skills.
Yeah. I think that for CV-based questions, the interviewer can really be asking about anything, looking for anything.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be within these constraints that we talked about. Like what are they looking for in fit in general for this interview? But then it really depends on what thing they're looking at in your CV. So they might look at your CV and ask you about, you know, your basketball journey because, well, they want to see how that connects to where you are right now because you've been, you know, a basketball professional athlete for your whole life. So how come are you here? So they're trying to see, do you really understand the job? Do you know what you're getting yourself into?
Exactly.
Or they might be asking about a specific project in your firm that looks challenging and they want to know how you did it. So they're kind of looking for maybe persuasion skills, maybe your personal drive, like can you get ish done? Or maybe they're looking for, your leadership or whatever.
Yeah, and if they're looking for something specific, they'll let you tell your story. Mm-hmm. And it kind of has to be concise so that they can ask follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Right? And then when they ask the follow-up question, it's kind of a mini PEI question. Mm-hmm. Or if it's McKinsey, it's probably an actual PEI question.
Yeah.
And then you know what they're looking for, and then you can show that soft skill. Mm-hmm. And the last one in general fits that I have here is weaknesses or strengths. So usually it's weaknesses. So tell me about your biggest weakness.
Mm-hmm. That's a tricky one.
It's a tricky one because a lot of people either give a fake weakness.
Yeah.
I'm too detail oriented.
The perfectionist.
Yeah, I'm a perfectionist. I work too hard. I burn out, and or they don't know, or they say a real weakness, but then they don't know how to position it in a way that makes them look good. Yeah. Which is why people use fake weaknesses in the first place. Mm-hmm. If they say, I'm lazy and disorganized, and they don't have anything else to say, it's not very good, right? So it's better to say you're detail-oriented. So what they're actually looking for here, they're looking for a real weakness. Mm-hmm. It could even be, I'm too detail-oriented. Although it's kind of cliche, right?
Yeah.
But if you use a fake weakness as a real weakness, either way, actually, tell a story about how that weakness has hurt you or work you've done. Mm-hmm. Because then it becomes more real.
Yeah.
And show self-awareness. Mm-hmm. I have this problem. I'm not perfect. Here's my main weakness.
Yeah.
I'd also say, don't give a weakness that is a no for consulting. Mm-hmm. Right? So I can't do any math.
Yeah.
Too bad, my friend. This job requires math.
I never work more than 40 hours a week.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Too bad. What are you doing here? But you can give weaknesses I'm disorganized. Mm-hmm. When I'm really, really stressed, I can't think.
Yeah.
Or I have a hard time connecting with people that I've just met. Mm-hmm. These are real weaknesses and they have real implications and you can use them.
Yeah.
But then what you do next is you tell them, you show a lot of self-awareness and responsibility, personal responsibility. These are the keys. Mm-hmm. So you show how the weakness has actually hurt your work and you show how you mitigate it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people say you show what you're doing to fix it, which is fine, but it's not enough because maybe you won't be able to fix it if you're still working on it. So you have to show how you mitigate it, how you make it not a big deal.
Yeah.
For example, I forget names and faces a lot. I have problem. A lot of people have trouble with names. A lot of people have troubles with faces. I have problems with both. It sucks. What do I do? And I wouldn't use this in an interview, I guess. I mean, I could, but just as a personal example, what do I do with this? Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I do is I tell people when they tell me their names, oh, sorry, I'm probably going to forget it because I'm really bad at it. But it's not personal.
But that's the way you mitigate that problem.
It mitigates. I didn't get better. I could use mnemonics to remember better. Mm-hmm. And maybe I should do this, but I mitigate it without improving. And that's good because it's an instant solution.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It also shows that you care.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell me if I'm getting this right. In general fit, interviewers can ask you a lot of questions, and each one of them can be looking for a different thing. But overall, in general fit questions or in your answers, you want to convey a few things, and that can be honestly in almost any question, that you've made and you are making wise choices for your career.
Mm-hmm.
You have learned and you can learn from your mistakes and also from your hits.
Right.
You have an overarching plan for your career and life.
At least a vision. Maybe
at least
not
a vision. Yeah.
plan, but yeah.
Yeah, you understand how things connect and you have a cohesive way of living. You're not doing things randomly.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Okay. So, and that might appear in any of the questions in all of them, but you really want to convey those things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the soft skills, which sometimes appear in fit questions, especially in CV-based questions, but they're most characteristic of the PEI interview. So I guess we can get into the PEI.
Let's do it.
So the PEI is personal experience interview. It's an interview about one personal experience you've had.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's called the McKinsey PEI because McKinsey invented it.
Yeah.
And in its format, at least in its consulting format. And it's a very specific type of interview. It's the hardest fit interview or behavioral interview you ever gonna get.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit unsettling going through it. You're gonna understand why in a moment. And you have to prepare well for it. Some other firms do PEI as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually not in every interview. It might not necessarily be a formal part of their assessment.
Yeah.
But for example, if you go to a BCG interview, maybe your BCG interviewer, maybe a partner, was an ex-McKinsey consultant. And if that's the case, they'll for sure use the PEI because McKinsey consultants swear by it.
Yeah.
So how does it work? It's called an interrogation style interview or the interrogation method.
Okay.
Right?
That sounds scary.
Yeah. And that's why it's unsettling. So basically, McKinsey wanted to test for soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to do it in a forward-looking manner like they do with the case.
Yeah.
Like they actually test your real problem-solving skills in real time with the case.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to do that with soft skills.
Yeah, like leadership.
Yeah, like even if they put you in a room with other candidates and give a task, like a group kind of interview, like it's so artificial, and like it depends so much on the other people you're doing those tasks with,
and on the specificities of that specific situation.
Yeah, and it's short time, so you can fake a lot.
Yeah.
So it's not a very good method. So what they did was they used the same interrogation methods used in legal courts, in the justice system, to assess. And obviously it's an adaptation, right? But to assess whether the details of the story that you're telling and if it actually happened as it happened. Now,
how does that look like?
Okay, so basically it's a 10 to 15 minutes for one story. They ask you to tell a story about one specific thing that you did.
Yeah.
So like, tell me about a time where you led a group to achieve an objective, a difficult objective. And then you start telling the story.
Yeah.
Right? That you've hopefully prepared for. And then they start interrupting you. And they start asking follow-up questions and going deeper. So like, you said this, but why did you say this phrase?
Yeah.
Specifically, why not that? And then you give your rationale maybe. And then you're like, oh, but have you considered doing this instead? And then you say whether yes or not. And then you're like, okay, but when you said this phrase, what was the tone of voice? How did the other person react? And what do you think the other person thought as you asked this question? How do you think the group perceived this? And they ask all these questions. They may challenge your answers. Like, that wasn't very smart, was it? Because you could have done this instead. And they're always testing you from, they maybe won't call you not smart, but you get the idea. So they're asking all these things surrounding very specific details of your story. And then once they're satisfied and they feel like they have a full understanding of that part, and they're not going to do it with every part, just the ones that matter, though it's hard to predict which ones, if you're inexperienced, then they'll let you back to the overarching plot of the story, and let you keep going through it. So it's kind of like when giving a testimony to a judge, and then the lawyer of the other party is asking all these questions to you, and you have to be sharp. Like you have to know what you're talking about. You have to have your facts straight. So you prepare to this interview kind of like if you were giving a testimony. Like you need the details. You need the cohesive story with all the intentions and stuff. And why do they do this? They want to see your thought process.
Because that's how they know you're going to do it again. Because
Exactly.
you've got the right thought process, so you're going to have the right thought process again. And even if you get to a different path of action, you're going to do it for the right reasons, so you're going to go in the right direction.
Exactly. And then they can see, like, if your story makes sense. Like, they asked you to tell about a time that you led a group to achieve a difficult goal. They can judge for themselves whether the goal was actually difficult. Whether you guys actually achieved it. Whether you actually led the group. Versus, I was vice president of whatever, but you didn't do anything. So you weren't actually the leader, right? So they can assess these things in a very nuanced way. So that's basically how the PEI works. And it's an interesting style of interview. Like, once you get comfortable with it, it's nice because you get to tell your stories in a very complete way, you know? But if you're unprepared or if you don't know what to expect, it's very unsettling because you're like, I'm telling my story here and this person keeps interrupting me and they're being a little bit abrasive and, you know?
And they're asking questions that I don't really know how to answer.
Exactly. Or maybe I don't remember these details. Right? So the types of questions. Basically 3. For McKinsey and other firms, basically the same. First one is called personal impact. It's a bit of a misleading name because it's actually persuasion. But they probably don't want to use persuasion because it's giving away too much. So it's basically, in these questions, they want to see if you can convince someone to change their mind or their agenda on something that matters. Right? So it's not like, I want vanilla ice cream. No, get blueberry. Like, this doesn't matter. It has to be something that matters, right? So in an organizational setting, everyone has their own interests, their own opinions of where the organization should go or where the project should go. Can you change people's minds? Can you have influence, right? And the reason why this is important is everyone's going to be disaligned in any organization. There's too many people for everyone to be completely aligned. But if you want your project to be implemented and your work to be taken seriously, you need to align people.
Towards the same goal or towards their right actions.
Right. Despite their different incentives and beliefs and career goals and so on. So some subtypes of questions here is, tell me about a time you changed someone's mind in an important way, or tell me about a time where you solved a conflict between two other people. So it's not like between you and me, it's like I'm trying to help you two guys get aligned, right?
Which I can see a lot in the consulting context. Like, there are two people in the client organization that don't get along or that have opposing interests. And to get this project to work, you need to have them working in the same direction. But if they know that one person is doing A, then they're definitely going to do B. You need to get them aligned so that your project will work.
And sometimes it's more work for one of them and it may harm the bonus of the other person. And, you know, it's... or they may have to downsize their team. So it's like hard decisions, right? Couple ways people screw up on this one, because when they ask you a question like this, they're actually looking for specific persuasion skills, right? couple ways people mess up here is they talk about changing, let's say, beliefs.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I convinced my dad to vote for
whoever,
a different president.
Yeah.
And that's a bad example because even though it's hard to convince someone to vote for a different person, first, they're your dad, so, maybe they just want to be nice to you. And second, it doesn't have, it's not the same type of persuasion that you need in an organizational setting where it's going to actually change the day-to-day or the resources or the team structure or even the variable compensation of someone.
Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't have a lot of skin in the game, even though it's an important question. Like,
and their specific action isn't actually going to affect them. The collective of the result is, but their specific action is not.
Yeah, exactly. And another way people screw up on this one is they are too logical. Like they think like, oh, I just need to give the right arguments to this person and then they're gonna agree with me. And persuasion doesn't work like that. Like,
the most common I've seen in this sense is, the candidate has to convince their boss of doing a project that they wanted to do and the boss doesn't want. And so they showed the ROI spreadsheet or they talked about a specific consequence that the boss didn't think of. And the boss is like, oh, all right, now I understand. This is profitable. Let's do it.
Yeah. And sometimes like the boss doesn't want to do it because if it goes wrong, they're going to get fired because the last two people who've tried it got fired. So, doesn't matter the ROI if you're going to get fired, right?
Yeah.
And there's maybe a 30% chance of working, even though the ROI is great.
Yeah.
So the other one is entrepreneurial drive. But it used to be called drive and achievement, which I think it's a more descriptive name because entrepreneurial drive has this bias towards entrepreneurship. And then a lot of people try to tell about the startup that they've tried to do and failed or whatever.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's drive to do something. And I'll go into the entrepreneurial thing in a bit. So basically, they want to know about a relevant and challenging project or task that you did on your own and that was tough. And when I say on your own, it was like you drove the initiative. Maybe there were other people involved. Usually not, because then it's kind of more of a leadership question, which I'll get to in a bit. But basically, can you get stuff done?
Yeah.
And then the entrepreneurial thing is, do you start stuff without being told by others?
Right, because if it's your thesis for a specific college class, then it's not really something that you drove. Yeah. You had to do it.
Or like your boss gave you something to do and then you did it. Okay, that's great, but it wasn't your initiative.
Yeah.
So sometimes they ask you in the phrasing of the question for you to have had initiative. And sometimes they don't specify that, and then you can just show how you get stuff done. And what they want to see is your process for doing things.
Right.
And how you handle obstacles and limitations on resources.
Right.
So that's why it needs to be something hard.
Because when you have a process, that means that when obstacles come up, you can overcome them. You won't only be able to finish things when the situation is easy, right?
Yeah. And like they're looking for some adversity because it's like, oh, I did this really hard thing. Like I learned calculus. Okay, but what were the adversities? Oh,
none. I had a great teacher. I had great classmates and I had
really
plenty
good
of time.
Math. Exactly.
Yeah.
And like maybe it was hard from a social standpoint, like people think it's hard, but maybe it wasn't that hard for you, or it was just a matter of hard work, like number of hours put in. I love the example we had of one of our clients. So she was a like theoretical physicist, PhD, super smart. And her story was about how she learned a programming language to code something. And that in itself is not that hard. Like, I mean, I can't program, so, but like lots of people learn programming languages, and maybe my interpretation is for a PhD in theoretical physics, maybe it's a walk in the park.
Yeah.
But she had a month to do it. And obviously she didn't learn the whole language or learn it very well, but she had to learn it for a specific task. I don't know, some telescope pointing somewhere, I guess. Or something like that. I don't know. A particle accelerator, these kinds of things.
Yeah.
But so it was really hard because she had a month, and the code had to be right.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a great example of something. I wouldn't say it's easy to learn a programming language, but there were adversities.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And then the third type of question is inclusive leadership, they call it. It used to be called leadership. Now, the thing with leadership, it's a bit of both. It's working with other people, which involves persuasion. And it's also getting stuff done, because it's not like having a party with other people. It's like moving a project forward.
Yeah.
So it's, can you get people to work together and achieve an objective? Now, the inclusive part, they've just added this word, and they sometimes tweak the words. But it basically means it has to be people of different backgrounds. Which is kind of obvious, honestly. Like, even before they added this word, it would have been better to have people of different backgrounds, because then it's harder to make these people work together.
Yeah.
Right? And you also need the story to be something that was a little bit hard, because otherwise, what's the point, right? What did you have to do, really? So these are the main types of questions.
Yeah.
And for each question, you have to prove that skill. Can you get stuff done? Can you persuade people? Can you work with other people to get stuff done? And sometimes they vary the constraints. So like, oh, tell me something of this type that happened in the past 2 years, or in this company that you've worked at. Or let's say it had to be at least 5 people.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not uncommon for them to do that. They don't do it most times. But sometimes they put constraints so that you need a lot of stories, good stories, to tell, so that you can fulfill, like, I need a persuasion story that had these criteria, and also within this constraint. Now, I wouldn't tell people to obsess too much about it. Because
about the constraints?
Yeah, because you can always say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't have a story within this specific company that I've worked at that I think is good, but I have a great one in this experience.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously don't want stories that are 10 years old or something like that, because it gets them thinking, like, what have you been doing in these past 10 years that you haven't had to persuade anyone, right?
Yeah.
But this is basically the types of questions that they look for in the PI. And they're looking for, in general, like, besides the specific things of each type of question, they're looking for 3 things. One is cohesive stories.
Yeah.
So I hear your story. I ask for follow-up questions. I get all the details. Is it cohesive?
Yeah.
Or does it sound like bullshit? Because people can make up stories, right?
Of course.
So it has to be cohesive. The second thing is they look for past evidence of replicable skills, because in the end, they don't really care about that specific story. They're using it as an example to see if, were you to be in a similar situation again, would you have this soft skill? Would you be able to get the work done, to lead a team, to persuade someone to change their mind? Right? And because of that, your stories have to have the thought process, the rationale of why you did that.
Yeah.
And the third thing that they look for is what I call introspective self-reflection, which might be the same thing. I don't know. But it's basically, are you aware of what you did and why in that situation?
Mm-hmm.
And do you know your own flaws and what you could have done differently? And what have you learned from that you would do differently and why? Because that shows them that you learn from each experience.
Yeah.
Right? It's one thing to... So there's kind of like 3 layers to your soft skills. One is like, you got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
You tried to persuade someone. You didn't know what you were doing. You didn't think too much about it. They said, yeah, okay, that's fair. Let's do it. And they definitely don't want this because it's not replicable.
Yeah.
Now, when you show a thought process, when you show you thought about how the other people thinks and what your strategy would be to persuade them, for example, or to lead the team or whatever, then you have like replicable soft skills, which is the second layer. And then there's the third layer, which is like improvable, replicable soft skills. So like you learn from each experience and you get even better at them, which is what they're looking for, because probably your soft skills as an associate are different and not as good as the ones that you need as a partner.
Yeah.
So in consulting, you have plenty of experiences to learn to be a better leader, a more influential person.
Yeah.
Get more work done faster and with less hassles. But you have to learn from each experience. Otherwise, these experiences won't help you evolve, right?
Yeah.
So this is the PEI in a nutshell. I hope it was clear. I don't know how good a job I did, but
I do get what the PEI is. I understand from what you said.
And you've never done it, so
yeah,
I guess that's something.
Yeah. But now I want to hear, truthfully, the question that everyone's asking. Truthfully, how important is the fit portion of the interview, the general fit, the PEI?
What do you think?
I think that consulting firms wouldn't do it if it wasn't important at all.
Right.
And I think that it showcases a lot of skills that are important. I wouldn't say it's half, like most consulting firms say it is. It's half of the evaluation. But I do think it's something that can get you rejected if you're clearly not a good fit. That's my simplistic answer.
Yeah, I agree. So I'd split the answer in two. So the general fit is one thing and the PEI is a different thing. So for the general fit, I've heard multiple times from multiple interviewers at Bain, BCG, lots of firms, that it doesn't really matter.
Really?
Yeah. Like they want to see how good you are at the case. And they will never say this out loud. Because imagine you go interview with BCG and they just give you a case and you solve the case and then they say goodbye. Like, first of all, it's a weird experience. It's very dry. Second, you haven't talked about yourself. It's like, it's way too technical, right?
Yeah, it feels like you're an object.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. And then you get an offer from BCG and from some other firm that asked all sorts of nice questions about you. You're probably going to go to the other firm because you're like, I didn't get good vibes from this. Just doing the case and leaving. Like,
yeah, you're not going to feel like you're connected with the firm, like they actually care about you.
Yeah. So I think no one said this specific thing to me, but I think they take like 20 minutes from the interview to do a general fit interview in great part to make you like them and make you feel respected as a human. And that's important, right? But unless you really mess up, it's probably like your case performance is way more important. So for the fit, I think it's a qualifying factor. Like if you didn't mess up in it, the case is what's gonna, let's say, rank your performance against other candidates. if you were dismissive, if you didn't care about it, if you can't communicate well and like your stories don't make sense, if it doesn't seem like you understand the job or you want to do the job, then they will reject you based on the fit, regardless of how well you do the case, just because you don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Right? But if you pass this bar, I'd say it's very hard to differentiate yourself on the fit interview, on the general fit interview.
Yeah.
Unless you have a stellar CV, like Olympian athlete, Harvard valedictorian, whatever. What's the thing they say?
Yeah, that's valedictorian.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not American, so I don't know this. But if you have a stellar CV, like you were an astronaut and then you sold the startup, then the fit interview is gonna help a lot and differentiate yourself. But it's not the interview, right? It's your CV. Like you can't control that.
Yeah.
Once you're there.
Okay, I can believe that as long as you don't screw up.
Yeah.
I get that.
Now, for the PEI, I know for a fact that it's as important as the case.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually 50% of your evaluation at McKinsey. And they do choose, let's say, a person who's had average PEI performance and great case performance, and another person who had average case performance but passed all the minimum bars.
Yeah.
And stellar PEI performance, they might choose the second person.
Yeah.
So a good PEI performance can cover and differentiate yourself from, I wouldn't say a bad case, but from a average case performance, as long as you meet the bars. Also, if you're amazing at the case and your PEI is kind of weak, they will reject you. And the reason why is that because it's such a structured interview format, they can track how well you did in the case, how well you did in the PEI, how well have you done in your career at McKinsey.
Yeah.
And there's more correlation with your PEI performance than your case performance.
Right.
So it's kind of cool, right? People with better PEI go further at McKinsey and are better performers than people with better case performance. Now, that's among those who get in.
Yeah.
Right? And those who get in are already really good at the case.
Yeah.
So that doesn't say that the case is not important. It just says that among those who met this minimum bar of the case, it's better to have better soft skills than better hard skills throughout your career. And because of that, it's as important in the evaluation process. Now, that doesn't mean you should spend as much time preparing for the PEI as you spend for the case. And the reason is, with 5 or 10 hours, you can have excellent PEI preparation. And that barely gets you started with cases.
Yeah, because you know what the questions are going to be or the possibilities of questions in PEI, but in cases, there are a lot more types of questions, a lot more ways to bring a case.
Yeah, and also because a lot of the PEI is the stuff you've done.
Yeah, true.
And you've already done that. And very few people have practiced structured problem solving before a case interview, right? School doesn't prepare you for that.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of prepare that from scratch. Like you already know math and can make logical arguments and stuff, but you've never brought that all together to structured business problem solving.
Yeah.
As a case, while you've done interviews before for college, for jobs, even though it's not the PEI, it's easier to tell a story, to learn to tell a good story and be interrogated throughout it than to learn to case.
All right. I get it. Makes sense.
So yeah, I guess, does this cover what to expect in your fit interviews?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay, I hope this, I've tried to make a masterclass. I hope it honors the name, Fit Masterclass, and yeah, I guess that's it. That's the basics of the fit interviews and consulting.
All right, great. Thank you.
See ya.